you know someone who had a crush that went too far? Jason only loved two things, butterflies and Angie. He wanted to ask her out for ages but never had the courage to. He was always kind of a strange kid, with his obsession with butterflies and all. All his school supplies in his room were all decorated with butterflies. People at school didn't know much about him except that. Some rumors flew around every once in a while though. Some people even said that his mother had gifted him a butterfly resin before she passed away. Angie, however, never made fun of him. In fact, when Jason asked her on Halloween weekend if he could drive her to a costume party together, she thought it was charming, but things took a dark turn quickly. At first, the car ride was awkward, but not anything to be worried about. Then Angie looked at her phone and saw that they passed the address of the party. She said, "Hey, you're going the wrong way," but there was only a grin on Jason's face. The next day, police found both Angie and Jason. Jason was lying on the ground, cold, but above him, Angie was strung up on the ceiling, with two large pieces cut out from her back and opened up to look like wings.
This is why you should never go on a Ferris wheel. Once a couple went to an amusement park when they saw something terrifying. There's a Ferris wheel there that was really popular, but it did have some rumors about it going around town. They say years ago a boy came there with his parents who knew he wasn't old enough to ride the Ferris wheel, so they left him alone. But this boy didn't want to be without his parents, so at the last minute he grabbed onto the bars, lifting him high up in the air. Eventually he couldn't hang on anymore, so he fell. But this couple thought it might just be a story, so they went on the Ferris wheel anyways. This is when the unimaginable happened. Everything seemed to be normal at first, but when they got to the highest point, the Ferris wheel stopped. Then it burst into flames out of nowhere. People began screaming in terror, some people fell, eventually they had to be rescued by a helicopter. The owners of the amusement park had no choice but to demolish the Ferris wheel. But this is when they found out something that chilled them to the bone. While they were taking it apart to find the reason it burst into flames, they found a pair of tiny shoes stuck to the mechanism.
If a package arrives at your door, don't do what she did. Once there was a girl named Gabby who received a mysterious package in the mail. There was no name and address written on it, so she had no idea where it came from. She opened it anyways, and inside was a disc with no name or cover on the casing. Thinking it might be one of her friends pranking her, she called them over to her house. Her friends arrived and none of them knew what the mysterious package was. Good was. So they decided to watch the digital versatile disc together. Immediately they were surprised at what they saw on the television screen. There was a clown standing in a normal looking bedroom. The clown was holding 2 red balloons. Stared deeply into the camera, then slowly his expression turned into a manly smile. Menacing grin, Gabrielle's friends thought it was funny and began laughing, but Gabrielle just sat there with a terrified look in her eyes. Eventually, her friends asked, "What's wrong? Isn't this hilarious?" Gabrielle responded with her voice trembling, "That is my sleeping room."
If you're alone right now, don't watch this video. In the winter of 2018, a man who was living alone in the mountains wakes up to find a red ball sitting on his front yard. He assumed the only neighbor he had must have kids, and so he kicks the ball over the fence, goes inside, doesn't think anything of it. That night, he wakes up to the sound of kids laughing outside of his window. He goes outside to check on them because it's the middle of the night, and there's no kids anywhere, but that red ball is back on his property. So he picks it up, brings it in his house, and goes back to bed. The next morning, he goes over to his neighbor's house to let them know that their kids were out in his yard in the middle of the night. But it turns out his neighbor is just some old man who lives alone, and there aren't any kids anywhere in the area. That night, he wakes up again to the sound of kids on his property, and when he looks outside, there's no kids, but that red ball is back on his property. Panicked, he runs downstairs to make sure the one he brought in is still inside, and it's gone. He checked every window and door, and everything was still locked. It didn't make any sense. He decides to look out the window one more time, and off in the distance is some weird, stiff figure watching him.
This woman will never look at sticky notes the same way again. Once a young woman came home to find her house empty. She went to the kitchen to get a snack and found a sticky note left on the fridge. But as soon as she looked at it, she realized something was strange about it. It said there is someone in the house. Assuming it could be her brother, she said, "That's really funny, but the prank's over." No one answered. She walked towards the door, but it was locked. Then she turned around and on the table was another sticky note. It said, "You're not going anywhere." She began to feel scared. She opened the kitchen drawer to try to find something to defend herself, but the drawer was completely emptied. Inside was another sticky note. "You shouldn't play with sharp things." She ran upstairs to her bedroom and locked the door, and quickly called the police and begged them to come as soon as possible. Then all of a sudden the TV turned on by itself. It was loud and static, but on the screen was another note. "Now I have you where I want you." This time the young woman began screaming. Soon the police found her in a corner crying in fear. They searched the house and found no one there. But as soon as the young woman stood up and tried to leave, police found something horrifying. An officer took off a note stuck on the young woman's back and handed it to her. It said, "I was this close."
This is why you should never watch TV late at night.
Once a mother and a father decided they needed a break, so they planned a night out together, and they left their 2 children with their babysitter at home. Everything was going good, the children were well behaved, and the babysitter was just sitting around while watching the kids, but eventually she decided that she wanted to watch some TV. It turns out she couldn't watch it downstairs because they didn't have cable downstairs, so she called the parents and asked if she could watch TV with the kids in their room upstairs. The parents agreed. They were about to hang up the phone when the babysitter had one final request. As she entered the parents' bedroom, she asked if she could cover up their large clown statue with a cloth or a blanket. She said it was making her very uncomfortable. The phone line went dead for a second. Then the mother said over the phone, "Take the children and get out of the house. We don't have a clown statue." As the babysitter turned around, she saw the corners of the clown's mouth widen into a smile.
When Jasmine was younger, something strange happened one night. Her mother checked up on her while she was sleeping, but it wasn't the way that you commonly believe. She woke up at an odd time of the night with a peculiar sensation that someone or something had been observing her. She looked up and noticed that her mother was just standing there grinning and glaring at her with her eyes unusually wide open. Jasmine questioned what she was doing awake at such an odd hour, and her mother responded, "I'm observing you." Jasmine knew something was wrong. They kept staring at each other, and neither of them blinked. Jasmine somehow knew they were playing a game together, a game to see who would win. Blink first, but what if Jasmine blinked first? She was horrified to discover this figure in her bedroom was not her mother. It was visible in her eyes. It held something frightening, something non-human. Soon this version of her mother began moving. Backwards without blinking, turning around or breaking eye contact. She just moved back until she reached Jasmine's closet, then opened the door and stepped inside as if she'd been staying there this entire time. Jasmine kept staring at the closet and without breaking eye contact ran to her parents' room. There she saw her mother on her bed sleeping peacefully.
If a parcel arrives at your doorstep, don't do what she did. Once there was a last name Gabby who received a mysterious package in the post. There was no name and address written on it, so she was clueless about its origin. She opened it anyways, and inside was a digital video disc with no title or cover on the case. Dazed, thinking it might be one of her friends playing a prank on her, invited them to her home. Her friends came and none of them knew what the enigmatic parcel was, so they decided to view the digital video disc together. Right away, they were taken aback by what they saw on the television screen. There was a clown standing in a normal-looking bedroom. The clown was holding 2 red balloons. Stared deeply into the camera, then slowly his expression turned into a scary smile. Gabby's pals found it humorous and started to chuckle. However, Gabby just sat there with a frightened expression. Eventually, her pals inquired, "What's the matter? Isn't this amusing?" She replied with her voice shaking, "That is my bedroom."
This is why I don't tell anyone where I live. There was once a boy who asked his single father for a bedtime story, so the father told him. There was once a boy named Colby who made friends with another boy online called Helper23. On Colby's birthday, Helper23 wanted to give him a present in real life, so Colby gave him his home address, where he lives with his mom, his dad, and his little brother. But then Colby started to feel a bit weird about giving his address to a stranger online. The next night, he thought he had to tell his parents about it. He called out to his dad but got no reply, then found both his parents killed and a man wearing a dark hoodie holding a knife in the hallway. As Colby started to beg for his life, he hears his little brother crying in the next room. The intruder then strangles Colby and leaves the house with Colby's baby brother. The boy then looks up at his father and asks, "Why did the intruder take the baby?" To which his father just calmly smiled and said, "I've always wanted to be a father."
Storytime about room number 6. So a little background information. I was fresh out of nursing school when I got my first job in a pretty big hospital in a department that I really never thought that I would ever work in. And it was a 6-bed cardiac ICU. It's an intensive care unit for people with heart problems. I mean, it was nice. It had windows that overlooked the city's Capitol building. I started out working 12-hour shifts, and the hospital that I worked at had 4 ICUs. All of them were always full, so my unit always ended up being a code bed, which pretty much means that the beds we had were kept open for immediate emergency type of thing, like if somebody had been hurt. You know, they need to go to the hospital quickly, something like that. I had been working there for a year, and I was no stranger to death. Each patient of mine who had died on my shift was usually already on their way out, like half of the time, these people, literally their families, were already by their side. They already knew it was going to happen. The DNR was signed, do not revive. They already had the funeral home picked out and everything. So, it was never really a surprise whenever somebody had passed away in my ICU. In fact, the only time that I ever actually needed to do CPR on my shift wasn't even in my department or my unit, so I went. On a 2-week-long vacation, came home and had to get straight to work. Well, on my first night back, I received a report from the day charge nurse that the priest was coming in the morning to bless room number 6. And at first I thought she was joking, but she was very, very serious. Apparently, while I had been on vacation, every patient who was admitted to that room had died. But as I said earlier, this was not a shock to me. People who usually came into our unit died. I mean, it didn't really faze me that much, to be honest, also because the institution that I worked at was very, very religious. Almost every department had a chaplain, so I just shook it off. I was like, all right, whatever. Well, then she said that room 6 was empty, and it was going to serve as a code bed for the night. Around 3 a.m., I got a call saying that they had somebody to fill that bed. So, we get the patient admitted and all settled into room 6. And it was a man who was about 50 years old or so. Very nice, and he had his wife with him, but she looked like she was exhausted. I got her some warm blankets, and I took her to another room so she could lay on a cot and get some rest. Well, around 3:30, I'm watching the monitors, and we had cameras in each room. All the patients were fast asleep, as we expected, and the cameras would all cycle through about after 3 seconds or so. For example, room 1, 3 seconds, room 2, 3 seconds, and so on and so forth, and it was all on one small TV that we had on our desk. Room 1 was fine, room 2 was fine, room 3 was fine, but then room 4, there was someone in there. Yeah. And I'm not talking about the guy who's in the bed, obviously, duh. I'm talking about there is someone in the room with him. It cycled too quickly for me to get a look at who else might have been in there with him. The thing is, the other doors to the unit were locked, so I thought that maybe a nurse had let his wife back in or something. But just to make sure, I walked down the hall to check, and when I looked inside, nobody was in there. So I shrugged it off. It was late and I was tired. I did not have time to deal with this foolishness. So I went back to my desk and continued to watch the monitor. So it cycled through again, room 1, 2, 3, and 4. I was not imagining something. There was someone in that room. I swear to God. A person was standing in the corner by the window, but their figure was covered in a shadow, you couldn't see any features or anything. This was one of those things where I could not move my body. So the cameras cycle through again, and this person was about 5 feet away from the patient's bed, it's not against the wall anymore, it's standing right by their bed. I think it cycled 3 more times, and every single time, whatever it was got closer to the bed, and as it got closer to the bed, the light from the hallway shining through caught the figure, but it was just still all black. The cameras cycled through again until this thing was right next to the bed. I could barely make a peep to the nurse next to me on the other side of the desk. It was like the movies. As soon as I formed the words to tell her, the alarm on the monitor went off, signaling that the patient had gone into a cardiac arrest, and the overhead system came on. And it was like a cart is needed in the ICU room. 4 or so people are pouring into our department. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, respiratory therapists rush into that room, but I'm frozen. I could not move at all. So, the cameras, they cycled through again. Room 4 came up per usual, and this time all the lights were on, and there were 15 people in that room surrounding the bed doing CPR. They were slamming meds into his IV, and someone went to go grab his wife. There this thing was again in the corner, a dark figure just watching this whole thing play out. The man ended up dying of a heart attack, sadly, and then room 6 was blessed in the morning right on schedule. I decided to put in my 2 weeks' notice. I never want to even go to a hospital ever again. That is the end of story time.